Can you imagine the sheer terror that gripped European sailors when they first encountered foods that seemed to pulse with otherworldly energy, foods that bled crimson juice or sprouted in impossible colors? Picture yourself as a 16th century conquistador, staring at a table laden with what your companions whispered were demonic offerings from the New World. This is the untold story of 7 American foods that Europeans genuinely believed carried Aztec curses, and understanding this culinary culture shock will completely change how you see the collision of 2 worlds that shaped our modern diet forever. Observe how the tomato first appeared to European eyes in the markets of Tenochtitlan, glistening like drops of fresh blood in woven baskets. Spanish chroniclers described them as devil's apples because their deep red color matched the sacrificial altars they had witnessed in Aztec temples. The fruit's acidic tang reminded conquistadors of the metallic taste that lingered in the air during ritual ceremonies. By 1544, Italian botanists classified tomatoes as deadly nightshade relatives, warning that consumption would lead to madness and death within hours. The Crimson Curse had crossed the Atlantic. Repair in the way chocolate arrived in European courts, not as the sweet treat we know today, but as a bitter, frothy drink that Aztec priests consumed before performing human sacrifices. The cacao beans themselves were currency in Mesoamerican societies, with 100 beans purchasing a turkey and 8,000 beans buying a canoe in the markets of Tlatelolco. Spanish nobles initially refused to drink chocolate, believing it would transform them into bloodthirsty pagans like the warriors they had conquered. The foam that crowned each cup reminded them of the saliva that dripped from jaguar masks during ritual dances. Even sweetened versions carried whispers of ancient curses. Cinta, the overwhelming fear that gripped European farmers when they first planted potatoes in 1570 and watched the tubers emerge from underground like pale, misshapen fingers clawing toward the light. The Andean origin of these devil's eggs made Catholics suspicious, as anything that grew in darkness was considered Satan's domain. French peasants refused to cultivate potatoes for over 200 years, convinced that eating them would cause leprosy and spiritual corruption. The potato's resemblance to diseased human organs only deepened European revulsion. Underground demons were not welcome in Christian soil. Eschewed the hushed conversations in 16th century Spanish monasteries, where monks debated whether corn represented divine punishment or demonic temptation sent from the New World. Maize grew in impossible abundance compared to European grains, producing yields that seemed supernatural to farmers accustomed to wheat and barley. Franciscan missionaries recorded that corn kernels arranged themselves in perfect rows like tiny soldiers, leading some to believe the grain possessed military intelligence from Aztec war gods. The golden color reminded Europeans of the treasure they had plundered, making them wonder if consuming corn would turn their souls to gold. This golden grain carried more than sustenance. Imagine standing before your first chili pepper plant in a Mexican garden, watching pods that ranged from innocent green to threatening crimson, each variety promising a different level of torment for the uninitiated palate. European traders measured pepper heat using a scale that compared the burning sensation to various forms of medieval torture, with the hottest varieties reserved for what they called Aztec warrior trials. Spanish physicians in 1571 documented cases of soldiers who consumed too many peppers and reportedly experienced visions of feathered serpents and burning temples. The capsaicin's effect on European digestive systems often lasted for days. Fire had found its way into European kitchens. Contemple how vanilla pods arrived in Spanish ships wrapped in cloth like sacred relics, their intense fragrance causing sailors to experience what ship doctors described as aromatic madness during long voyages. The Totonac people of Mexico believed vanilla was born from the blood of a princess who had been forbidden to marry a mortal, and this legend convinced Europeans that the spice carried romantic curses. Monastery kitchens banned vanilla for decades, fearing it would inflame lustful desires among celibate monks. The price of vanilla in 1580 exceeded that of silver by weight, making it accessible only to royalty who dared risk its supposed supernatural effects. Love and madness traveled together in those dark pods. Visualize the horror on European faces when they first witnessed Native Americans cultivating tobacco plants that reached heights of 7 feet, their broad leaves capturing moonlight like green sails in night gardens. Spanish colonists called tobacco devils. Lettuce, because indigenous shamans used it to communicate with spirits during sacred ceremonies. The plant's nicotine content caused European newcomers to experience dizziness and nausea, which they interpreted as possession by Aztec deities. By 1571, the Spanish Inquisition was investigating tobacco use among colonists, suspecting it of enabling communication with demonic forces. The leaf that spoke to spirits had found new victims. If you're fascinated by how food shaped the collision between old and new worlds, make sure to share this exploration with anyone curious about the untold stories behind everyday ingredients we take for granted. Today, observe carefully how avocados earned their reputation as forest butter cursed by fertility gods when Spanish conquistadors discovered Aztec couples consuming the fruit before wedding ceremonies. The creamy texture and high-fat content seemed unnatural to Europeans accustomed to hard cheeses and olive oil as their primary sources of dietary fat. Aztec warriors consumed avocados before battle, believing the fruit would grant them the strength of the jaguar and the courage of the eagle. Spanish priests documented cases of European settlers who ate avocados and reportedly experienced intense dreams featuring Mesoamerican temples and feathered serpents throughout the night. This green flesh carried more than nutrition, recognized the deep superstition that surrounded every encounter between European palates and these New World ingredients, each bite representing not just sustenance, but a spiritual risk that could damn the consumer's soul. The Catholic Church established special committees in 1580 to investigate the spiritual implications of consuming foods associated with pagan rituals and human sacrifice. Many European families maintained secret gardens where they grew American crops while publicly denouncing them as works of Satan. The irony was that these supposedly cursed foods would eventually become staples that fed European populations for centuries to come. Fear often masked the recognition of revolutionary nutrition. Avali how the transformation of these 7 foods from cursed objects to culinary treasures required generations of brave individuals willing to risk their souls for the sake of flavor and sustenance. Italian cooks began secretly adding tomatoes to their sauces in the 1590s, creating dishes they served only to trusted friends and family members. Spanish chocolate houses operated like speakeasies, offering the forbidden drink to customers who entered through back doors and spoke in whispers about the Aztec gods they were supposedly honoring. The potato's journey from devil's apple to Irish staple took over 300 years and required the intervention of French pharmacist Antoine-Augustin Parmentier, who staged elaborate publicity stunts to convince peasants that the tuber was safe. Culinary courage slowly conquered supernatural fear. Perceiba the ironic reality that these foods Europeans feared as Aztec curses would eventually become the foundation of cuisines that define entire nations today. Without tomatoes, Italian cuisine would be unrecognizable, lacking the rich red sauces that have become synonymous with Mediterranean cooking. Chocolate evolved from a bitter ceremonial drink into the sweet confections that fuel modern celebrations and comfort rituals worldwide. Potatoes became so essential to European agriculture that their failure caused famines, most notably the Irish potato famine of 1845-1852 that killed over 1 million people. The cursed had become the essential. Record how corn transformed from a suspected instrument of Aztec warfare into the grain that would feed European livestock and eventually power American expansion westward. Chili peppers spread from Mexican gardens to Asian cuisines, Hungarian paprika, and American hot sauce bottles carrying their heat across cultures that had never heard of Aztec warriors. Vanilla graduated from banned monastery ingredient to the world's second most expensive spice, flavoring everything from ice cream to luxury perfumes. Tobacco evolved from shamanic communication tool to global commodity that would shape the economies of Virginia, North Carolina, and countless Caribbean islands. Sacred plants had become secular prophets. Intender the profound psychological shift required for Europeans to overcome centuries of religious conditioning that taught them to fear anything associated with non-Christian spiritual practices. The process involved not just conquering their taste buds, but fundamentally reconsidering their understanding of divine versus demonic influence in the natural world. Spanish merchants who traded in these goods often carried blessed crucifixes and holy water, performing ritual cleansings after handling what they still considered spiritually dangerous merchandise. The gradual acceptance of American foods represented one of history's largest-scale examples of cultural adaptation through economic necessity. Commerce eventually conquered superstition. Analyze the economic forces that ultimately proved stronger than religious fear, as European merchants discovered that these supposedly cursed foods generated profits that far exceeded the spiritual risks their consumption allegedly posed. The Spanish treasure fleets that carried gold and silver from the New World also transported secret cargoes of seeds, cuttings, and preserved foods for wealthy European collectors willing to pay premium prices for exotic ingredients. Portuguese traders established specialized routes to transport chocolate, vanilla, and chili peppers to Asian markets, where Buddhist and Hindu populations had no cultural association with Aztec rituals or Christian fears. The demand for these foods created entirely new categories of international commerce. Profit margins silenced spiritual objections. Confront the ultimate irony that foods once believed to carry Aztec curses would eventually become so integrated into European culture that their American origins were forgotten by subsequent generations. Modern Italians rarely consider that their beloved tomato-based dishes descend from Aztec agriculture, while Hungarian cooks preparing paprika-spiced goulash seldom remember that their signature spice originated in Mexican gardens tended by indigenous farmers. The transformation was so complete that by the 18th century, European cookbook authors were writing recipes for chocolate desserts, potato gratins, and cornbreads without any mention of their supernatural origins or the conquistadors who first feared them. Cultural amnesia had replaced cultural terror. Discover how this historical pattern of fear, acceptance, and integration continues to repeat itself whenever unfamiliar foods cross cultural boundaries in our modern globalized world. Japanese sushi faced similar suspicion when it entered American markets in the 1960s, with many consumers fearing that raw fish would cause illness or cultural contamination. Mexican cuisine encountered resistance in Anglo-American communities throughout the Southwest, where spicy foods were considered foreign and potentially dangerous to American palates and values. Even today, insects as food face the same mixture of disgust and spiritual objection that tomatoes once encountered in 16th century Europe, despite their proven nutritional benefits and environmental sustainability. History repeats in every kitchen. Conclude by recognizing that the story of these 7 American foods reveals fundamental truths about human nature, cultural adaptation, and the power of practical necessity to overcome even the deepest religious and superstitious fears. Each tomato you slice for your sandwich carries the echo of Spanish conquistadors who trembled before its blood-red skin. Every chocolate bar you unwrap connects you to Aztec priests who framed their sacred ceremonies around cacao's bitter essence. The potato chips you mindlessly consume descend from tubers that European farmers once believed could damn their souls to eternal punishment. These foods remind us that cultural exchange often begins with fear and misunderstanding, but can evolve into the most intimate form of human connection. Food becomes the bridge between worlds that once seemed impossibly divided. When you next bite into any of these formerly cursed ingredients, remember the courage required by the first Europeans who dared to taste what their culture had taught them. To fear, their bravery in the face of supernatural terror made possible the rich, diverse, interconnected cuisine that defines our modern world. What other foods in your kitchen carry similar stories of cultural conquest and culinary courage that you've never considered? Don't forget to watch the video and playlist that will appear on your screen.